call the budget hearing to order. Today is April 28th, right? Okay, 2014. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco, Hart, here. Hodgkiss, here. Murillo,
here.
Rouse, here. White, Mayor Schneider.
Here. And I don't see any speaker slips.
I haven't received any.
Okay, so I'll close the public comment portion, move it right over to Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Samario for our first budget session.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Bob Samario, Finance Director. This is the first of 8 special budget work sessions that we are holding. They're also part of the public hearing that we're required to hold. During these 8 work sessions, we're going to have all the departments present to you their recommended budget for 2015. Today, we're going to start with all the administrative departments, as we usually do. We're always first up, and I'll be starting with finance. But just some general comments about what you're going to see over the next 8 meetings. Keep in mind that we are dealing with this. We're really focusing on the second year of a 2-year financial plan in June, not that long ago, when we adopted the 2-year plan. Within that, we had a second year, which was fiscal year 2015, and that represented at the time our best estimate of where we thought revenues were going to be and our appropriations and so forth. So obviously having more time, about a year has gone by, we have more information. What we want to present to you, and really the focus of these presentations, is show you how the original plan changed to what we're recommending today. So it's not a lot about new programs, new activities. It's really the focus of what's changed. And in many cases, you're going to find things didn't change, so there's not a lot to report. In some cases, there have been changes. And then on top of that, then we have sort of this new expanded programs or enhancements that each department will be covering in addition to what sort of changed normally. And the reason some of the numbers change is primarily in the salaries and benefits. We always reforecast numbers every year. And even though we have the same number of positions, people turn over. And so we go from step 5, potentially, if they retire, to a new person to step 1. We have more information on retirement costs. So you're going to see some of those changes reflected in these numbers. But it's just because we reforecast, and that happens every single year. And this year, we did find that for police and fire, the retirement rates, you'll see that they went down more than normal, so they're lower than what we had estimated, or what PERS actually estimated. For everybody else, it was a small change, but so you won't see much of that. But generally, when we talk about the changes from 15 original plan to 15 recommended, it's not going to be a lot of it. It's just reforecasting numbers, and we'll highlight, of course, where things change beyond that. So that's kind of a preamble. So starting with the finance department, there are 7 operations or functions. In addition to the administration, we have budget management. And you see who the managers are. General services, which is purchasing, central stores, and mail. Treasury. And environmental services is part of a separate fund that will be discussed at a different meeting. They're part of this. They represent the solid waste fund. Accounting, and then risk management. And risk management is also a separate fund, but that'll be included in today's presentation. Mark Howard, the risk manager, will be covering that section. Quick overview. This is, again, the focus. Originally proposed plan for 15. That was in the 2-year document, and what we're recommending now and what's changed. And you can see overall in finance, not a lot has changed, but I do want to point out that what happened there? Let's see. There should be some little things popping up. There it is. So in salaries and benefits, that net number of $33,000 that went up, it includes adding $50,000 in hourly support, hourly salaries, not permanent employees. In the finance department, our work is very seasonal. We have the CAFR, the year-end process, then we have budget on the other side of the year. And it does have a large impact on our staff where we're working a lot of overtime hours. So we are proposing to add $50,000 to support those efforts. It's going to all be funded from additional revenues, which I'll talk about in a moment, within the finance department. So it's not going to have any general fund impact in terms of reserves or anything like that. You'll see supplies and services going down by $34,000. That's because we have a contract now, or had a contract that we terminated on December 31st with Muni Services, a name you might have heard. They've been doing for many years our sales tax and our utility users tax auditing. And the one thing that was unique about the UUT audit was that they were being paid on a fixed fee basis. So regardless of what they found, they would be paid a fixed amount. And we wanted to make their contract consistent with the others, which is all contingency based. So they only get paid for what they found. It turns out they found a fair amount of money that more than offset our cost to them, but we want to give them more motivation and incentive to look for more revenues for us by being on a contingency basis. So starting next year, we won't be paying them directly as an expenditure. It'll be an offset to the revenues that they find. So we'll impact revenues, but it will no longer be an appropriation. Net is going to be the same. It's just how we present it in the budget. Hopefully that makes sense.
So if I understand it right, the outcome should be more for them, more for us.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's based on what they find. And then lastly, this ties to the allocated costs, and you'll see this for the most part in all departments. I'm not sure how big it's going to be, but one of the things that we added as one of the restorations or enhancements to the budget next year is providing more money to information systems for capital replacement. They have a large body of infrastructure assets which they haven't really been able to address on a timely basis. This is going to be providing them more money. This is our share of that that's been allocated citywide. On the revenue side, really one change I wanted to point out, and this is what I kind of alluded to, the second line, fees and charges, we are proposing to increase what we had in the original plan from from 250,000 to 300,000. These are late fees that are what we collect from our utility customers, water, wastewater, and trash customers when they don't pay on time. It's an $8 per occurrence late fee. And we found that you can see the projection for 2014, it's coming in at 325. So we're proposing to increase the budget by 50,000, not fully to the 325, because we think that might be sort of moderating over time. But for now, we are able to raise that estimate, and that's the money we're going to be using to pay for the additional hourly salaries that I just talked about.
Mr. Smarto, question about the line item with the late fees as being part of what will become the new status quo budget. Then in future years, when those late fees do actually do what they're supposed to do, is get people to pay their bills on time, and they no longer have the late fees, do we then have a deficit budget?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Alice, at that point, we will have to adjust our budget internally to start finding a way to offset those reduced revenues. My guess is that it may never go below 300,000 or not much below that, because there are always people who are late. It's sort of like, to me, parking violations. It's amazing. You always have people who fail to comply with those requirements, whether it be in street sweeping or normally in the downtown area. So I think it's a number that will probably level off a little bit, but I don't see it going down much. But if it does, if we see a big drop, we'll have to adjust our budget to accommodate that. Some highlights. I mentioned the increase in hourly salaries for seasonal impacts. Some key work efforts. We are currently working on negotiating a new banking services agreement. As you know, we were for many years with Santa Barbara Bank and Trust. When they were taken over or purchased by a Union Bank, we've negotiated a one-year agreement that started essentially January 1 and will expire this coming calendar year or January 1st. So we are looking to either do an RFP for new banking services or negotiate a contract with them. But that's going to be a big part of our effort next year to figure out what are the services we really want and negotiate a price for that. They are going to be charging us more than Santa Barbara Bank and Trust used to. So we want to make sure that we've got the right services, that we're figuring out what it is that we really need and coming up with a good price for that. So that's going to be an effort next year. And then with respect to the resource recovery project, that's an ongoing project that has been going on for many, many years. But as you probably have heard, the EIR is due to come out in the next month or two. Once that's completed and we kind of figure out what all the elected officials want to do with that, we will be negotiating sometime next year a waste services agreement with Mustang Joint Ventures that includes a MRF, a materials recovery facility, and or an AD, an anaerobic digester. Could it be either in the Higues landfill, could be here in the city? We're not sure yet. That's what the EIR will kind of inform us, but that'll be a big effort next year. And then, as you know, we've begun this year the implementation of a new financial management system. That's the Munis system. It's been a pretty big impact on all our staff. This July 1, we will be rolling out the latest in the final programs or modules, human resources and payroll. That's a really important one because that's how people get paid, so we're going to be paying a lot of attention to that. But we know it's going to roll into middle of next year because the transition is, in terms of adopting to a new system with staff citywide, is going to take some time. One other thing we're going to be looking at next year is, and actually we started it already, is looking to potentially use an outside vendor to help us put financial information on our website. They call it a cloud-based system, but that's financial in nature, that's a lot more easy to digest than sort of looking at a CAFR or our budget document. It's just information that the public can access about the city as a whole, its finances, by department, by program. It's just the programs that are out there. So we've looked at one already. It's called OpenGov, and we're going to be looking at a second and maybe consider doing our own, developing something in-house that people can access on our website. And then the last thing, a little more innocuous, but we are going to be developing some written procedures for our utility billing and accounts receivable functions. And honestly, this is an area where we've had some difficulty with turnover in staff and the like, and some customer service issues. So we're trying to we've got great staff now in place, and we want to sort of add to that by documenting what we do so we have some consistent procedures. So that's the end of the Finance Department General Fund. Unless there are questions, I'll turn it over to Mark Howard. He's our risk manager to talk about the self-insurance fund.
I just did have one brief question. Very small amount of money, but a big percentage increase on the slide that had miscellaneous fees and charges. I can't recall exactly what it says, but it was about a 50% increase. What was that related to?
Let me go back to
I
that.
think it was only a $5,000 difference, but miscellaneous license and permits.
I'm going to have to get back to you on
That's
that
okay.
one. Yeah.
Thanks. And I guess maybe another question too is where are business licenses? When will which discussion is that going to
So
be part of?
business licenses are considered a non-departmental revenue, so they're not part of any department. We'll be talking about those revenues, taxes, essentially, with the Finance Committee actually tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. timing.
So we'll get into a discussion of that. In fact, if you want to, we weren't planning on getting into a detailed discussion of that, but we could at that meeting tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm sure everybody has seen the emails. There's concerns amongst artists about business license issues, so thanks.
Mr. Mark, quick question about the banking services. I know every time this comes up, people ask about all the different banks in town. There's certain size and asset limitations that we have. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. It's really about their ability to deliver services that we need. And one of the services that we need that's critical that some banks or a lot of banks that are smaller can't provide has to do with what we call lockbox services, where we get 30,000, we send out 30,000 bills a month for utility bills, and they get processed by the bank. And so rather than coming to our office, they process them themselves internally, and they send us information electronically. That's a service that's important because for us to be able to do that work in-house would take a lot of staff, and that's just part of the services that they provide and we're used to. So smaller banks really can't provide that services, and there are other services that smaller banks can't provide. Yeah, and then you were kind of alluding to the concept with collateralization. Banks are required to put up a certain amount of assets for monies that we hold on deposit with them, and also monies that we hold as investments with them. And so not all banks are able to meet those collateral requirements where they have to put securities up on behalf of our assets.
Thank you. Mr. Samario, is this a good time to ask about possibly the council discussing funding for an audit related to the living wage vendors? And I see some staff related to that topic here.
Anytime is a good time to talk about that.
Okay. I'm the liaison to the Living Wage Committee, and we've been having discussions that we would like some safeguards in place to make sure that the vendors really are paying the living wage. And Mr. Hornig might have more to say about that. Thank you.
Sure. Let me just start by saying that, give you a little bit of background because it's a good topic. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, the council allocated one-time money. It was $10,000 to do an audit of 3 vendors who are contractors who do work with the city to make sure that they were complying with the living wage ordinance, and we did undertake that. Unfortunately, those audits didn't really result in any finding or any information because what turned out was these vendors didn't maintain adequate records for us to be able to determine whether they're complying with the living wage ordinance or not. So it was sort of a fruitless effort for us. At that time, we had suggested some additional language in the ordinance to put some restrictions and requirements on vendors for record-keeping purposes and with some penalties if they don't. So to add some teeth so that if we're going to go out and audit them, then there's a requirement that they maintain those records and we have some ways to penalize them. That was never implemented. So we have not done any audits other than that one-time basis. So, but Bill can speak to what we're kind of doing now, not related to audits, but what we're kind of doing in the front end to ensure that they are compliant with the living wage ordinance.
What we do in the front end for living wage bids, we put the requirements in the notice to bid, so it's advertised in the newspaper. The requirements are also included in the bid documents themselves, as well as the living wage forms that we expect a successful bidder to complete. When we award a contract, if the living wage documentation is not returned to us, and part of that's to certify that they're aware of the requirements, they'll notify their employees, so on and so forth. We follow up to get that. So that's kind of what we do to make sure people are aware of it. Just some background on audits. When I've checked with some of our other agencies that have living wage programs, I couldn't find any other entity that did a proactive audit. Everybody uses the same model that we're using, which is complaint driven. But I know in the past that was one of the recommendations from the Living Wage Advisory Committee is to have a pool of money, available for audits, so that kind of keeps the bidders on their toes and makes them aware we're following up.
Is the issue that they don't have, for example, if you have a group of employees, our ordinance only requires those that work on the city contract get paid the living wage when they're working on the city contract. So it's not like asking for W-2 reports is going to answer your question. Because if it shows that some are being paid less than the living wage, you don't know whether or not whether they worked for the city for that or not. Is that the issue at hand? What is the concern here? What is what's the roadblock that we're facing?
We never received a formal complaint, but there's sort of the perception, among some of the advisory members, and I think a few people probably in the business community, that people, because we're not auditing, that people may not be complying with it, so the playing field's not level.
Okay.
The other thing we do is we do ask for payroll records, and we do, it's the responsibility of the departments to collect the payroll records and check them. I haven't really gone out, so I don't know to what extent departments are doing that.
Madam Mayor, but from an audit perspective, that's the issue, that they have to maintain records for those who only work on our contract, because that's the only requirement. They can have 20 employees and only 2 of them work on the city contract. They only have to comply to the extent of those 2 individuals. But what we found is they hadn't kept good records to be able to prove that when we went out and audited them.
So out of those 20 employees, they would have to be able to tell who of the 20 worked and because once you know who they are, then you know what their pay is. I imagine most in the situation, they're going to be paid hourly, not salary. So you'd have time, I would hope, have time records. They have to by law anyway. So,
Right.
Okay. I was just curious what the issue was. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is, a previous living wage committee back in 2010 had recommended a $10,000 allocation as a pool of money. I think, though, if we were to do just one targeted audit, it would be $3,500. Is that right? These are sort of the figures we're working with, Mr. Hornig?
I'm not sure if the cost has changed. The last audit was about $3,500 per audit, per firm audited. And I don't think those have materially changed in the last few years.
Okay, well, I'm bringing it up to the council that there's an issue, and maybe our committee needs to go back and make a better case if we think there's issues. But what I think happens, Madam Mayor, is that the employee does some work for the city and some work that's not the city, and then the employer will balance out the employee ends up getting, how am I saying it right? They balance it out, and so the person doesn't really get more money for the city. They get less for the other. So
Just the way wage and hour laws work in California, you have to be paid. You have to show how much you're getting paid for which hour. So if you're a non-exempt employee, which I imagine these are. So, yeah, I mean, these are details, I think.
But I know a
understand.
person who
Yeah.
does get the wage, and so there are companies that are doing it. He loves when he gets to work on a city project, because he's like, yeah, the higher wage. So we'll continue to look at it and bring it back.
Mr. Hart? Yeah.
Isn't it possible just to have as part of the contract a requirement for the bookkeeping that they don't currently do?
We have bookkeeping requirements, but I guess from the committee and from when we did a survey from many years ago of contractors that are subject, they want to know that somebody's looking at the wages to make sure everybody's following, the rules. But we have record-keeping requirements, and that was one of the problems when we did the audit. They'd have some payroll records, but they want to match those with time cards to make sure this employee really worked on the city count. And they had trouble cross-referencing documents, so that it made the audit inconclusive.
Well, maybe you can just look at that, because clearly, if the contract doesn't require them to keep the records that are necessary to have an audit be effective, there's no point in auditing them and spending the money on the audit. It's more fundamental than that. So I guess that's what I would ask, is just to look at that contract and see if we can just require them to have the right information, such that if we did decide in the future to audit, that there would be a purpose to that.
Okay. Well, I know we have record-keeping requirements. I don't remember if it's 3 years or 5 years, but there's
I don't think it's the
language-
time. It sounds like what it is that you're asking them to keep track of.
I think the issue, though, is if they don't, what's the recourse we have, because we didn't, and
Well,
there's no.
they sign a contract with the city, and
Right.
part of the contractual
Right.
requirements could have record-keeping requirements.
Right.
That sounds like more of a administrative thing than an ordinance
Right.
issue. But
Exactly.
perhaps the committee needs to look at that a little more. But I think there's a way
Gotta be
to
a way.
figure this out, yeah.
It's a matter of checking the records. You can put it in there, but if you don't follow up, you don't know if they're really maintaining those records or not.
Okay. Well, it sounds like more conversation on a committee level is needed there. Thank you. Okay, any other questions before we move on to the self-insurance fund? No? Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. Mark Howard, Risk Manager, talking about our self-insurance fund today. Quick overview of the self-insurance fund. There's 4 major programs. Workers' compensation program, which provides benefits to injured employees according with federal and state law, helping employees come back to work after an injury through modified duty. The liability program, which involves investigating accidents on city property and adjusting damage claims, and correcting potential hazards on city property. And then the occupational safety and health program, which helps us ensure a safe work environment, and our monthly injury and illness prevention program. And loss prevention training. Too fast there, Bob. And our final one is the administrative operations, which we will go into in greater detail. So on the appropriations for fiscal year 15, we're looking at a total budget of $6.5 million with appropriations of slightly more than $6 million, the largest piece being our insurance and claims premiums, about 80%. Just as a refresher, we are self-insured for most of our exposures, workers' compensation, liability, and property. That self-insurance does come with a small retention with purchased insurance above that. For example, in liability, we are self-insured for the first $1 million. We participate in a risk-sharing pool for the next $4 million. That risk-sharing pool includes 11 other municipalities in the state of California. And then the risk-sharing pool purchases $45 million worth of commercial insurance above that for a total coverage of $50 million. One note here that is worth seeing, because we're noticing an increase, and that is the piece of the pie chart that shows unemployment compensation. This has grown dramatically over the last 5 years. It now encompasses almost 4% of our total appropriation budget, up from a piece that was less than 1% just a mere 5 years ago. So on the expenditures, you'll see that we did some rebalancing because we are going to be recommending a minor change in staffing. What I'm here to tell you is the good news is that the claim frequency, or the number of claims reported in the workers' compensation and liability programs, continues to trend lower than historical rates. However, the severity of those same claims continues to rise, and that is of great concern for us in the Finance Department, and we'll be talking about that in more detail in a few minutes. The cost for claims and insurance within the workers' comp and liability programs alone are going to be greater in fiscal year 15 than we project for 14 by a dramatic number, and most of that is based on our actuarial report. The property insurance is also coming in higher, while some of our miscellaneous insurance policies for airport liability, marine liability, watercraft, and those are remaining flat. So, next screen. So our revenues, you can see that more than half of the revenues are related to the workers' compensation program. That has been consistent in the last couple of years. The insurance market continues to put big pressure on those workers' compensation costs. Industry-wide, workers' compensation costs are going up in the last 3 years, and our actuarial report indicates that we need to move our reserves higher than what we have currently on hand. And the property insurance piece that you'll see there, the 20%, those monies, we will likely see those premiums increase 10 to 15% in the coming years. That is based upon the worldwide market of large property losses. Don't have to think too far back to the Sandy storm on the East Coast. That's putting a lot of pressure on the worldwide property markets to increase their rates, because much like the city is experiencing, and you'll hear this from many of our departments, that our interest income is coming in less than expected. Well, the insurance companies are seeing the same thing on a much broader scale, so the only way that they can recoup their monies is to raise premiums. So that's what we'll be seeing in the coming months and years.
Just so it's clear, when it says premiums there, what that means is that's what's charged to the departments. So these are premiums paid by the departments based upon Mark's estimate of what their portion of the pie is and based on historical records. So if premiums go up, that means the departments are all going to see increases in their budget over time.
That's their overhead costs. So, next point. So what we're looking at in our proposed changes here is that the actuarial report that was presented to us in December of 2012 asked us to increase our fund reserves by $3.1 million. And what we've done in the mid-year is to adjust those premium rates for workers' compensation to begin rebalancing that deficit. You'll see here that for fiscal year 15, as you go down the line, we are not looking to take a withdrawal from our Excel account. That is the excess liability pool that we participate in. We do expect that there will be over $900,000 available to us should we need it in that account, but I'm not recommending that we take any of those monies at this time. We will list the balance in the Excel account as part of our an asset on our financial plans, but I'm not expecting to take any monies from that. Next slide.
Mark, I just want to jump in real quick and mention that the additional $300,000 you see in the recommended adjustments, that was part of the staff recommended enhancements that we brought to you. It was a total 1.4, a lot of park enhancements and the like, but this is one of the enhancements we thought was kind of important citywide to provide additional funding to that program, since, as Mark talked about, and you'll see in a moment, we are sort of upside down with regard to that program currently as a result of the most recent actuarial report.
So the key budget changes, one is a salary and benefit net increase of about $9,000. What we're proposing is upgrading one position from an administrative assistant position to that of a safety coordinator, and we'll be able to offset part of those costs with savings from the underfilled risk analyst positions in the workers' compensation and liability programs. Neither one of those are at full-time right now, so we'll see a minor increase in salary costs. The next budget change is under the workers' compensation. As I said before, the actuarial study says that we are underfunded on our reserves. This is partially because we have presented rebates back to the general fund and enterprise fund in previous years, but also because of some costs that are increasing, and this change is to just begin that rebalancing of this fund. Next slide. So this chart shows us what the actuarial is telling us and where our costs have been over the last 10 years. And you'll see that the black column is the workers' compensation costs, the gray column are the liability claims costs, and the blue line above it are the actual assets on hand in our reserves. And as you can see, over the last several years, we got to a high point of being overfunded in our reserves, which allowed us to give rebates back to the general fund and the various enterprise funds over the last several years. Unfortunately, now you see in 2012 and 2013, those costs are starting to come back up again, and the actuary is likely going to be telling us again in December of this year to raise reserves one more time. I'm hoping that doesn't come to pass, but that is a strong possibility.
So if you were to look at this sort of as a balance sheet, the blue line is our assets. The other bars are really liabilities. So these are not just what we're paying annually, but what the actuary says we should have money in the bank. Sort of think of it like a pension, the money we're supposed to have in the bank and what we really have. And we've, over the last, since from 2004 through 8, we were overfunded. And that's what enabled us to give the rebates that Mark talked about. We gave about $4 million back to general fund and enterprise funds during that period of time, which was helpful. But unfortunately now, because of some bad experiences the last actually a couple of years, and then the last 5 years, their actuary is saying, you guys need to put more money in the bank or set aside more reserves for not only current claims, but maybe future claims because of the statistical, occurrence. So that's why those lines now crossed in the other direction. And this tends to happen. It's very cyclical, but we are in a position now where we're sort of underfunded in what we should have. Not by a lot, but we're hoping it's just a one-time thing. But it's possible that with other claims we have kind of in the works right now, they may ask us to put more money aside than even what we have today, or even what this suggests. And so, that's why we add $300,000 just to kind of make some progress toward that deficit. Sorry, Mark.
As Bob was saying, this is just the beginning. We're trying to take active steps to make sure that we stay ahead of this process. So on that same previous chart, you'll see a charge of $75,000 coming into us, which is relatively new money. It represents a large claim that the self-insurance fund paid in fiscal year 14 related to abandonment of a street. And the streets fund is going to reimburse the self-insurance fund for those costs over a 10-year plan, meaning that we'll get $75,000 back from the streets fund for the next 10 years. And also, as I said before, we are seeing that we're going to have lower interest income than we previously expected even a year ago.
If I might, the way that's invested is strictly regulated, is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, yes, we're governed by state law, and we also have our own investment policy that's slightly more restrictive than that. But we have to make sure we're protecting all of our investments, so we have to invest in very safe securities. And unfortunately, the environment right now is that the interest rates are very low, and last year we're anticipating that they grow a little bit beyond what they are today.
Right.
And they've continued very low, so we're just seeing another year of lower interest rates.
We're lucky to keep up with inflation, right?
We're not keeping up with inflation in a lot of our investments.
Mr. Hart?
I can just wait till the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Don't want to.
Can we move along? So the staffing change that I alluded to earlier, it's one change from upgrading the existing administrative assistant position to a safety coordinator. This will be an entry-level technical position. The focus of this is to improve the injury and illness prevention program with a focus on reducing the frequency and the severity of the types of injuries reported by city staff. We feel that this is going to help us move those columns into a better position so that we're not spending as many dollars each and every fiscal year. And then lastly, the key change in our P3 objectives this year is to develop a cost allocation system for the unemployment insurance claim costs. The workers' comp program is going to work with the human resources folks to determine if this is even possible to sort of charge this back to the departments that are actually creating those kind of costs. It's something we'll have to investigate, and we're hoping we can do this in a positive fashion. With
Okay,
that,
Mr. Hart.
I'll entertain questions.
Okay, can we go back to the bar chart with the, I forget the title of it. Let me grab my thing here. The Self-Insurance Fund, the History of Assets and Liabilities. So you mentioned extraordinary claims and liabilities, and that's why the actuarial is telling us we need to increase the reserves. And I don't see those extraordinary claims except for 2013. Is it outside of the city that they're speaking to? Or, I mean, those last 5 years from 2008 are remarkably consistent except for 13.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, there were 2 years. Well, first of all, the actuarial looks at a 5-year window. And in 2012, they looked at a 5-year window. And of the 5 years, 2 of those years, fiscal years 9 and fiscal year 11, had increased claim reserves in both workers' compensation and liability claims that were unprecedented in that 5-year window. They were
not seeing this on this chart. Are you explaining something that isn't on this chart?
When you look at the 5 years from 2007 to 2012.
2007 is like 2013.
Maybe I can jump in.
Thank you.
So, if you were to look at our budget and our expenses or costs every year, you would see that in those years we're talking about, we did have extraordinary claims and costs. This is what the actuary says we should set aside in reserves. This is the liability, the balance sheet side of things. And they only do that every couple of years. And it was just the most recent actuary report that came out in 2012 that said, hey, our most recent look back 5 years says something a lot different than we did it 2 years prior to that. And so it's only going to be reflected for the first time then, because that report we get affected our June 30, 2013 cap or our balance sheet. So all along, while those costs may have been incurred, it wasn't until later the actuary said, okay, I'm going to look back again, and gosh, we have the bad experience in the last 5 years. Now, starting in 2013, we're going to tell you to put more money aside. You're required to put more money aside.
So the black and the gray bars are not the actual claims?
Costs. No, those
Okay,
are what
thank
the
you.
actuaries
That's
tell
where
us
I
to
got
put
it.
aside in
Okay.
reserves.
I got it. And then how long a period of time do you sort of plan to rebuild that $3.1 million hole? Because you're increasing it by $300,000. Is this sort of like a 10-year plan that you're thinking about?
It's probably like a 3 or 4 year plan.
Okay.
That assumes that the actuary doesn't come back and tell us that we need another $3 million or $2 million. It depends on what happens this year and next year in terms of actual claims that hit the city from a workers' comp perspective.
So the best case scenario is there is no additional requirement, but we do have a $3 million hole that we're going to have to
Right.
fill over the next couple of years.
Right.
That's a pretty big.
And it's
Next
actually-
year we'd be looking at a big increase.
Yeah, and it's actually a little less than that because we have, as Mark indicated, it's a little obscure or abstract, but we have money on deposit with Excel. They're our joint,
Right.
the JPA, and it's money that's really ours. And we're going to actually start booking that asset now on our financial statements
That's
or
about a
balance
third
sheet.
of
So
it.
it reduces it down to $2.1 million.
Okay.
And another way to look at this is there's $6 million of cash in that account. And each year we put on top, we typically put $3 million in there. And then we pay out a certain amount of claims. And if we have a couple of good years, then
Builds up.
it builds up pretty quick. And this is what the actuary said you need to have. But it was also, you look at it and you go, wow, he went from $4 to $7 million in 1 year. And when you see big jumps like that, we're always careful about, don't just trust the actuary. Rates would be going crazy. You know, the fund is in sound in terms of cash in the bank. It's in sound condition. We just felt, you know what, it's a big enough number that we should start addressing it. If we have a couple more bad years of experience, then we say, yeah, we need to keep putting more money in there. But we didn't want to overreact in a given year because of the actuary's analysis.
That's a great explanation. Thank you. And then on page, well, gosh, these slides aren't numbered, so go back to the self-insurance fund, proposed changes to original plans. There's a list. There we go. No, not that one. The one that has the $50,000 difference between supplies and services and workers' comp insurance claims. That's the one, yes. So they balance at the end, but why this shift from workers' comp and claims insurance to supplies and services?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hart, that was just an internal rebalancing to move monies around to make sure that we had monies in the proper line items for the costs that we expect to spend this year.
Okay, so it better reflects what actually happened last year.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, what is the largest liability claim that the city's ever paid? Because we have essentially $50 million worth of coverage, right? What's the relationship of those two? Anybody know? Sort of totally off the top of your head, sorry. Maybe even just order of magnitude.
Off the top of my head,
Have we ever exceeded $50 million?
we have never exceeded $50 million.
Okay.
God, knock on wood
Have we
on
gotten
that.
anywhere close? Like 10 million, 20 million? Any
Not
ballpark?
to, not to my recollection.
Okay, good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just kind of questions that come off of Mr. Hart's questions. That the losses themselves we haven't seen as a slide, and might that be see Mr. Smario squinting? Is that not the case?
So the losses are.
But I'm hearing. If we go back to the chart that
Yeah.
Mr. Hart was
So if
speaking from.
you look at the
No,
two
one
row,
that's
right?
got the one that's got
Yeah.
the.
Well, just before I go to there, I wanted to show you from a budget perspective on an annual basis that right in the middle of this chart
Right.
are the three big line items: the workers' comp claims and insurance. That's where we
Okay.
pay the insurance, but the claims themselves on a cash basis, and the claims portion being the largest part of that, and then the liability claims and insurance. So those two lines are what drive this. And if you look back historically over the last 5 years, you're going to see a couple years where those numbers are bigger,
Okay,
or at least
so-
where we had larger claims.
So adding those up to somewhere south of $4 million would be kind of
Yes.
the number. And,
Yes.
and
So that's the budgetary sort of reflection of how much we pay out each year.
that might might help us lay people follow along if we saw that chart with the losses tracking it. And that's number one. Then number two, I'm hearing you talk about the interest income that the city gets, and you were talking about that as part of the package of why we're needing to pay more. And certainly everybody knows we're not getting anything in the way of interest income. So does that mean we therefore need to be putting more money into this fund? Is that, or is this just in general that's just
I think it's the latter. It's not a big part of what they make every year. So, but just to point out that, it's another year of having lower interest rates. And this is true of all funds, general fund, enterprise funds, and the like. And we could provide council with some slides that we present every year that talk about sort of the claim frequency and the magnitude. And in fact, we kind of went over that with Finance Committee not too long ago. We went into those kind of details. But Mark every year puts together those reports for Jim and the other departments. We'd be happy to send those to you to see a lot more detail about what has happened over the last 5 years in terms of particularly workers' comp claims and the frequencies.
it went out that my
It's okay.
into my
It's
ear,
comp-
but anyway.
it's- yeah, it's-
Thank you.
Pretty arcane.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Howard, you were talking on the slide that has self-insurance appropriations, and it's a small chunk of the pie, but it is the one that went up the most, from 1% to 4%, the unemployment compensation. Is that just an anomaly, or is there logic behind that, or?
Madam Mayor and Councilman Rouse, we're uncertain whether that is an anomaly or the new dynamic. That's part of the reason why we are looking into the P3 objective of looking at how do we do this better? Is there a better way of doing this? Is this just truly the new reality and there's nothing to be done? We don't know the answer to that question. That's why we put it on as an objective.
And I will add that because it's been a smaller number, we've never budgeted for that, even though it's been charged to this fund. So we are now starting to budget for it and charge departments for this. So that's what Mark is saying. We're going to come up with an allocation to best allocate those to the various funds and operations.
Mr. Hart?
And just before we go to another fund, I just want to say, first of all, attaboy for the cloud-based system potentially for fiscal transparency. I think it's a great thing. The public's having a much heightened expectation about the transparency of public finances, so that you're ahead of the curve on that. That's great. And then, I guess obviously with all the problems with government agencies implementing new software systems. I think we all know what I'm talking about. Do you have confidence that you're going to be able to make this transition with the new FMS system? Are you testing it behind closed doors before you roll it out? All the questions that didn't get asked at the federal level. Something else.
Madam Member, Council Member Hart, sorry. So we've already rolled out most of it. That was January 1. We called that the core financials. We intentionally, because it's good practice to kind of do payroll and HR last because they're the most important in a sense because it affects people's paychecks and they're a big part of what we do. So we rolled it out in January. Yeah, prior to doing that, we did a lot of testing. It took us a year to get to the point between we purchased it and implemented, so it was a long implementation phase. But, we're still dealing with bugs and getting people used to a new system. It's anytime you're dealing with something new, it's always going to be hard to kind of adopt to that or adapt to that. And again, still little bugs here and there, but overall, we think it's a successful implementation. And then we're going to hopefully do the same sort of approach with HR and payroll for July. There'll be some bugs in transitional periods, or bumps along the way from July through probably December, if not more. But we're confident that we're doing the right thing and approaching it in the right way.
Oh, good. It sounds like you got a good plan. And there potentially is redundancy, too, in case something does
Absolutely.
go wrong.
We'll do parallel, particularly for payroll, we're going to do parallel processing for a while.
Because it isn't just, at the federal level, it's amazing how difficult this is. And I understand that. I mean, the Goleta Water District had a big problem with their billing system when they switched over software. And I'll probably give you 10 examples. So good luck.
The items, just to follow up, the items that you're rolling out in July are more internal than what the general public would see, or they're, for example, payroll and HR, that's about our own employees as opposed to the citywide billing system, or is there going to be something that potentially, can you?
Sure. I think for the most part, the one thing that's kind of mostly impacting external customers would be our utility billing system, but we implemented that 5 years ago.
Right,
Before
so if
we had
there was a
everything
problem, we would have heard about
Yeah.
it.
So, but all this is mostly internal processing, processing paychecks, payroll, billings, and just accounting and reporting.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to the Administrative Services Department. And I see El Presidente in the back of the room. If you wanted to speak, we haven't gotten to that part yet, and or if you were just listening, we'll be doing the Old Spanish Days is in the Mayor and Council Division. Okay, we haven't gotten there yet. Okay. Ms. Schmidt.
Hey, good morning, Madam Mayor, City Council members. I'm Christy Schmidt, the Acting Administrative Services Director, and I have with me here Rob Badger, our Information Systems Manager, and Barbara Barker, our Human Resources Manager. Gwen Pierce, who's our City Clerk Manager, couldn't be here today for a very good reason, but she's here in spirit. So I'll be presenting the Administrative Services Department's budget for fiscal year 15. I'll go over just a department overview, what the Administrative Services Department consists of, talk about a financial overview, both our general fund operations, which include HR and the City Clerk's office, and Intercity Service Fund operation, which is information systems. We'll talk about some key budget changes. We really don't have many. Administrative Services is a very simple budget, and we have only a few changes from what was presented to you in the 2-year financial plan a year ago. But we'll highlight those changes. And then talk about some of our performance measurement P3 program highlights for next year. So as a department overview, the Administrative Services Department has 27 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees for a total of 28 full-time employee equivalents. We have the City Clerk's office, which is managed by Gwen Pierce, Human Resources, which is managed by Barbara Barker, and Information Systems, which is managed by Rob Badger. Rob also has 2 supervisory positions, and I just want to throw a little something out here for him. He's been stepped up to start managing this year the Information Systems Department, had 2 vacant supervisory positions, and was still the lead for the Munis system implementation project, which was an enormous project. So we're happy he recently hired Kazi Brazga, who is our new network and infrastructure supervisor, and we're about to go into interviews for his second supervisor position. So that'll provide some much-needed relief for Rob. The City Clerk's office performs official duties related to elections, local legislation, the Public Records Act, the Political Reform Act, and the Brown Act. And they ensure that the city government actions are properly executed, recorded, and archived. Specifically, our City Clerk's office manages the council agenda process and does the minutes, maintains the official records of the city, ensures compliance with the Fair Political Practices Commission regulations, provides support to the city's 31 advisory groups, and conducts municipal elections every other year. There will not be a municipal election next year. The Human Resources Office performs functions that are designed to ensure that the city can hire and retain a quality workforce and can effectively implement the city's strategic objectives. Barbara and her staff conduct employment recruitments, administer the classification and compensation system and the employee benefits programs. They assist departments with performance management and disciplinary action when necessary, and serve as staff to our Civil Service Commission. They conduct workplace investigations and reasonable accommodation evaluations for disabilities. And separately, in a separate program, they also are responsible for employee training, including mandated training through the state for discrimination and harassment. As an internal services fund, Information Systems is funded from rate allocations to each department based on their computer resources and other requests for services. So they're funded both from the general fund and from the enterprise funds. The division consists of 3 programs, which are defined and budgeted to provide specific services. And the largest one, as you can imagine, is our network and infrastructure support. This program designs and updates the city's computer infrastructure, provides network and desktop computer support services, and they support more than 820 desktop computers, more than 90 different servers, and the connections to 50 different facilities citywide. And they also support hundreds of software applications. The help desk is run through this program. They purchase hardware and software licenses. They support our Microsoft operating systems and Office applications, and they ensure reliable network access citywide. They provide our email, our web access, and our internal and external city websites. And they provide security and protection for our systems, including doing backups, antivirus software, spam and mail filtering software, user accesses and permissions, and firewall protection. And they maintain our data storage servers and databases. Costs are allocated for this program based on the number of computers in each department. And a fee is assessed for each computer. There's a standard fee for standard computers. It's a little bit more expensive for computers that do computer-aided design, CAD computers. You need a beefier system for that. And laptops. And the charges that are charged to the department are, like other inner-city services departments, they're allocated based on computers, but they're fully loaded. So they include the cost of the computer itself, a share of keeping the network up, a share of all of the software applications that go onto the computer, and all of that. So the second program is financial and enterprise applications. And this program provides programming and reporting and other advanced support for major software systems. The 2 major software systems are the Munis financial management system. And that system, the costs for that system are primarily allocated out to finance and human resources. And then the Cartograph work order system is also supported through this program. And that's allocated out on the number of users in each department that actually use Cartograph. The third program is the centralized GIS program. They support the public and internal staff with maps and specific geographic data via a centralized database, and they set up the standards for data entry into the database and display. There are 170 layers that are supported in this GIS program. So if you can imagine a map of the city, the layers are folded over that, and there are over 170, including the parcels and city limits, streets, bikeways, MTD routes, and so you can pull one of those layers and look all through the city where anything exists. And so that cost is allocated based on the number of computers that are enabled to use the GIS software. and also on the actual use of the system. So departments that actually use the system more than others have a higher allocation of the cost for that. The network infrastructure support is about $2 million a year. The financial enterprise applications are about $500,000 a year, and the centralized geographic information systems are about $400,000. So that's how that breaks out. So the total operating budget for the Administrative Services Department is just under $5 million, $4,978,000. We also have a $344,000 a year capital program, which is the infrastructure replacement program. So all of our infrastructure has a useful life of varying number of years, and after that useful life, not only does the technology start to become dated, but also the manufacturers stop providing replacement parts and things like that. So you really have to look after a certain number of years, and it varies based on the on the hardware at replacing it versus just maintaining it. So that's our capital replacement program. The Information Services operating budget includes the $2.9 in operating funds and the $344,000 in capital funds. And the general fund is human resources at $1.5 million, and the city clerk's office at about $500,000, for a total of $2 million, or 38% of the department's budget. Looking more specifically at the city clerk and human resources appropriations by major object, salaries and benefits constitute 78% of the budget for the 13.5 FTEs. $223,000 is for supplies and services, and that includes the supplies and services include the city clerk's net file system for filing Form 700 and electronic campaign filings, the HR recruitment related costs, medical exams, and Department of Justice record checks, just to name a few. We have $174,000 is for allocated costs. That's the things that Bob mentioned. Building maintenance, telephone service, etc. And $35,000 for special projects. That is the educational reimbursement program for our employees who want to go out and take classes to further their job-related classes, to further their ability to perform. And then $10,000 is for other, and that's our online job application system. Moving on to information systems, you can see salaries and benefits are about 59% of the budget. Supplies and services are about 24%. And that's really for software licensing, hardware maintenance, and some professional services support. For example, we contract for support for our Access database programs. About half of that cost is for our Microsoft operating systems and software licensing. So Microsoft gets a big chunk of that. We have $344,000 in the capital program. That's about 10% of the budget. And then other costs include special projects, small software purchases, and debt service. So as I said, we don't have many changes from what we presented with the two-year financial plan. One change that we are proposing is a $34,000 increase in salaries and benefits in human resources to convert an administrative specialist to full-time to better support recruitment, training, and front office operations. And that's something that we discussed with all of the departments that are affected, and they were very supportive of the increase in staffing there. We also are proposing a $35,000 increase, and that's to reinstate the educational reimbursement program. We did agree in labor negotiations to reinstate that program, and that provides up to $1,000 per employee to take classes outside of the city that are job-related. It's a very popular program. In information systems, for several years we had a operating deficit between our revenues and capital expenses and our operational needs. And so Rob and his staff did a very detailed analysis of our infrastructure replacement needs and determined that we were about $210,000 short of what we needed ongoing for infrastructure replacement. And so we went to the department heads and all of the affected departments, and they were supportive of increasing funding for that, so we would not need to be using reserves for capital replacement anymore. So we're proposing $210,000 increase. About $121,000 of that is from 222, is from the general fund, and about $88,000 from enterprise fund allocations. Let's see. So in our revenues, the general fund revenues for the city clerk's office and human resources are primarily overhead charged to the enterprise funds. We're not requesting an increase in overhead for those departments. Miscellaneous clerk fees include domestic partner registration, copying fees, things like that. They're very, very, very small. Also no change to what we're proposing there. For our information systems revenues, you can see internal charges. Some of that is just the normal allocation charges for salary increases and things like that. But $210,000 of that is that increase for infrastructure replacement and to fully fund the infrastructure replacement program. General fund expenditures, this is for human resources and the city clerk's office. You can see that from the original plan for 2015, we're recommending an increase in salaries and benefits, and that is the change to the full-time for that human resources position. And then also the other big change there is the special projects, and that is the educational reimbursement program that we discussed. So the total change that we're requesting is $71,500 for general fund operations. For information systems, we're requesting an increase in salaries and benefits of $68,000. About $50,000 of that is one time. So that is, last year we increased our help desk support during the transition to Munis, and that's been very popular, and people have noticed the difference. So we're going to propose to continue that for next year. But after next year, we don't know that we will continue that increased help desk support. And then, the rest is just allocations for existing salaries and benefits. The capital program, we are planning to increase by $132,000 from what we had budgeted for this year, and that's mainly to catch up on backlog of infrastructure replacement. We have not been replacing some of our infrastructure at the rate that we would normally replace it under our replacement program, so this is going to be a catch-up a little bit. Afterwards, that program will stabilize. We will be using about $188,000 from reserves in the Information Systems Fund, but those are for the short-term costs, and we expect that that'll end after this year. And we'll still have $250,000 in reserves in this fund at the end of the year. Any questions about the financials? Okay.
May I, Madam Mayor? Go ahead. So you said the help desk, people liked it, but you're thinking about cutting it? Did I hear that right?
The departments liked the additional help desk support during the Munis conversion. So we've had extra people available to answer questions when you call up, 2598 and you get the help desk. We've had one extra person there, as a halftime person assisting from what is normally budgeted.
Okay, but that was for a temporary period.
That's for a temporary period. We'll reevaluate for fiscal year 2016 whether we need to continue that. Certainly, as we go through, we've got a lot of conversion to do still with Munis, with the payroll and the personnel system, including employee self-service, which is going to be an interesting thing and will require a bit of support. So we really think it's prudent to keep our current level of help desk support at least through the year, and then we'll reevaluate that.
Thank you.
Okay, some of our key performance objectives for next year. For the city clerk, we're we're going to investigate options to upgrade or replace the Questies agenda management software. That is our current agenda management software. It is also what feeds our website. And if you've ever been to the website and tried to look through the agenda, it can do it, but it's not as user-friendly as we would like. So we're going to be looking at options for that. Questies, we also use this system to support some of our departments, Public Works and Community Development, in document management. And so we're going to have to work closely with them as well before we just make a decision to replace the system to find something that works well for everyone. In Human Resources, Barbara is going to be continuing to implement the new Munis personnel system and help provide training for the departments on that and for employees, because they'll be doing, again, self-service on a lot of things. We're going to reinstate the educational reimbursement program, and we'll provide 11 harassment training sessions for managers and for staff. In information systems, some of the key objectives will be, of course, to complete the implementation of the Tyler Munis personnel and payroll modules. We'll be implementing the new infrastructure replacement plan and replacing all the workstations and other equipment that are past the recommended life. We'll also be working with staff on needs assessment and product selection, so going through the RFP process and selecting a product for a new citizens response management system. And that'll kind of integrate all of our citizen response vehicles, including the website, the telephone, and any other daily-to-day contact with employees. And it'll be a system that'll manage and hopefully improve our record keeping and our responses to citizen requests for service. So we're going to be evaluating that next year. We're going to be looking again at the agenda and document management system and evaluating what our needs are with relation to that and selecting a vendor for that. And then also our Tidemark permitting system, whether we want to upgrade or replace our permitting system. We'll work closely with community development on that. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Barbara or Rob, I'm sure, would be happy to answer questions as well.
Mr. Hart?
Well, first, Mr. Badger, thank you very much for your extraordinary work. Without the key staff, I'm sure you're very pleased to have those people back. And I have kind of a geeky information question. I saw in the paper today, I think, that Microsoft XP has some sort of security breach. I assume we don't have any XP platform computers in the city? Hopefully.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, we do have XP. In fact, that is what most workstations in the city have. As part of our upgrade project, and also we have another project to replace all of the workstations that we aren't replacing with Windows 7.
Okay.
And we hope to have that accomplished before the end of this year. So as far as the issue with, I read about that myself in the paper with Windows XP. It looks like Microsoft, even though they have stopped providing updates to XP, is going to come out with a fix for that. There are too many customers of theirs that have XP that haven't migrated to Windows 7.
Okay, good. Well, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of the Citizens Response Management System, so you're looking at that next year. You're not implementing that next year.
That's correct. We are going to be working with all of the departments that respond to citizens, so we anticipate that our needs analysis is going to take a bit of time. For the first part of the year, we're going to be really focused on the rest of the Munis project. But if we can proceed earlier, if we feel like that's something we can proceed with earlier, we've discussed actually coming to council mid-year next year. But just with workload the way it is, we're thinking that it'll be enough to select the vendor and get everything in place to go and actually purchase and implement the following year.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
For IT, are we going to be able to avoid Windows 8?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, absolutely. We are going to Windows 7.
That's reassuring.
Yes. I sympathize with anybody who tried to use Windows 8. I have it on my computer at home. I've customized it so it looks like Windows 7. The Windows 8 interface was too difficult for people to use. That was one of the reasons we decided when we're upgrading from XP to go to Windows 7 and not 8. The other is that the Munis software hasn't been certified to run under Windows 8. So we certainly don't want to introduce any complications there.
Yeah, it really is not user-friendly, as they say.
That is correct.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Ms. Murillo.
I'm sorry, I was a little slow there.
That's right.
Ms. Schmidt, is it too late to call it the Resident Response Management System? Not all of our residents are citizens. I just think if we could be sensitive to that issue, it would be respectful to everyone who lives in the city.
Oh, we certainly can. It's not too late. We certainly can consider that. CRM that is kind of a term of art in the industry, but we can call it whatever we like.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Great, thank you. Okay, Mr. Kalan, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Samario is going to help me with the slides. We can jump ahead to the organizational chart. Thank you. We have about 11.6 FTEs, but you'll see 14 boxes up on that slide. The two in the middle are hourly employees that are funded in part out of risk management for litigation. So the office plays bigger than it looks. And I observed that because in the course of preparing my organizational review, that's one of the factors I'm taking into account, essentially trying to consolidate all the money we're spending on legal functions in one area. We're spending it out of a lot of different pots right now. That's an increase. The 11.6 is a proposed increase of 0.3 of an FTE over the current fiscal year. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. The key on this slide is that 86% of the budget is in people. That's a big number. I would prefer to see more of the money spent on contract lawyers and less on full-time staff. The reason being that in many instances, it's more efficient to use highly competent outside experts for specialty advice when I can spend $300 to get an hour of work on the outside rather than spending 6 hours at $100 an hour inside to do it. So right now I'm not able to make that kind of judgment call easily, and I'd like to move to a system where I can. So that's really the key feature of that slide. I also think, as I mentioned at the outset, that pie chart understates the total legal cost, the $2.23 million number. While it's about 2% of general fund, which is in the range of acceptable legal costs, when you look at what's surveyed out there, it doesn't necessarily include all of the money that the city is spending on lawyers. And I want to try and at least be able to present to you a comprehensive picture. Next slide, please. These are our proposed changes. We're asking for about $39,000 in additional money. Most of it is on salaries and benefits, and I'll explain that on the next slide. We're proposing restoring cuts that were made during the depths of the recession to bring back 3 positions who are currently at 0.9 to full-time. And we're also proposing to add janitorial service. What a concept. Right now, not to complain, but I take the trash out on Mondays. And that's okay, but it's not the best use of time for professional staff. There is no funding for outside counsel, as I mentioned, and that presents at least a conceptual problem, if not an actual problem. Finally, our project objectives. I want to be candid. These objectives are trivial. The objectives you'll find at tab D17 of your budget book are simply carried over from 2014. They are the goal to prepare the zoning ordinance amendments in response to Plan Santa Barbara, working with risk management and department heads on prevention of tort liability, and continuing to resolve 80% of all code enforcement matters. The code enforcement item, starting with that last, is meant to be a measurable objective, and it does have a percentage there. I'm not sure how measurable it is. So what I want you to expect for fiscal year 16 is a series of truly measurable performance objectives for the office. We will be working in addition, though, on
supporting the new zoning ordinance process. There are $35,000 in the budget to use towards that goal. And I'll be completing my organizational review by July, which we had discussed doing in the first 100 days that I was on the job. And finally, it's pretty clear that the office needs case management software. The current system is old school at best. It's inefficient. It doesn't allow files to be consolidated with the attorneys who are working on them. It depends on a high degree of administrative support, which is why you'll see or saw on the opening slide that we have 5 administrative professionals for staff of 6 lawyers. That's a luxurious ratio these days, and I think it can be improved by using effective software. So that's what I wanted to present. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Well, you obviously inherited a budget, and you just started peeling everything around and seeing how it works. I would just suggest, I know you're going to probably next 2-year plan have your own flavor of it and probably have some changes. I would just suggest if there are things that you may think you need mid-year, we do a mid-year budget review. If there's something that's pressing, that might be something to go through the Finance Committee. Instead of waiting until next July, if there's something that you want to propose implementing in January, there's a process to do that. But I appreciate that you're looking at this with completely fresh eyes, and I imagine next year this budget might look a lot different than it has, which is fine. But that was just a suggestion into the future.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You had mentioned obviously outside counsel plays a different role in your management style, perhaps, than predecessors. How is that? Yet I know that the city has hired over year in and year out, hires outside counsel. Is that showing up in a different part of the budget? Can you talk about that a little bit?
It can. For example, the city
How
retains...
has it been? And do you know at this point?
2 answers. The first and more specific is that I haven't interviewed all the department heads yet to find out where they're buying outside lawyers. I am aware of, at least in connection with our water purchase, the city council authorized retaining outside counsel. And there's nothing wrong with retaining the outside counsel. The question is being able to present a complete picture of how you're spending your legal dollar.
And I can say also when it's been in response to some kind of tort litigation or liability litigation, then we've charged that out of to the risk management fund as a part of the claim.
Mr. Hart?
Following up on the mayor's point about mid-year budget adjustments and your reorganizational plan, do you anticipate having something before even January? Your plan in your schedule is going to be done by July-ish. Do you think that there will be something likely to come back even before January?
Yes. I expect to have ventilated the organizational review with the executive staff and, of course, my office by July. And then I'll be working with the mayor to decide on the best process for ventilating that plan with the city council.
Great. Well, that's very aggressive. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Last one, the city administrator's office and mayor and council office. Ms. Johnston?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Good afternoon. I'm Nina Johnson, assistant to the city administrator, and this afternoon I'm going to be presenting the proposed budgets for the city administrator's office and the mayor and council's office. Before I get started, I first want to give thanks to Jennifer Jennings and Tony Ruggieri in our office for helping me put the presentation together today and help with our numbers. What I plan to cover are the key program activities within our 2 offices, our proposed budget, and the work plan for the upcoming year. So just to take a quick look at the overall functions of our office, the City Administrator's Office consists of two programs. First, the City Administration Program, where 10 city departments are managed with approximately 1,000 full-time employees. Our office reviews the weekly City Council agendas, coordinates intergovernmental relations, the school district, county, neighboring jurisdictions. We negotiate and administer labor contracts with 7 employee bargaining units. Another large activity is designing and implementing workplace policies for our employees, coordination of citywide programs for sustainability, performance management, legislation, youth gang issues, and we also coordinate external and internal communication efforts, so communication efforts with our employees and then also with the public. The second program is City Television. In the City TV program, we televise meetings of the council and various boards and commissions. We televise meetings for the City of Goleta and Santa Barbara City College. We also produce special programming. Inside Santa Barbara is a news magazine show that runs every 2 months. We have a different episode. And Garden Wise on water conservation, and that's a quarterly program. And we have numerous other special programs that we run on we prepare for our website and for newsletters and so forth. City TV also maintains an electronic scroll that runs with information on community programs and city activities. That runs in between programming, so that information is maintained. Looking at the bigger picture and our proposed budget, we have a proposed budget of $2.2 million for the upcoming fiscal year. If you look at the salaries and benefits, at the end of last year, Assistant City Administrator Marcelo Lopez retired, and at that time our office restructured. So we brought Assistant City Administrator Paul Casey to our office full-time because before he spent 50% of his time in community development, so he moved to our office full-time. Christy Schmidt was appointed Acting Administrative Services Director. And with those changes, and we kept the Employee Relations Manager position, that was Christy's previous position, we kept that position in our budget, so with the restructuring changes and that vacant position, we have a net increase of $52,000 in the budget for next year. We'll see a slight increase in supplies and services for a total budget of $182,000 for next year. And this is, I'm going to get into some of the larger items in a moment, but this is including our contracts for Spanish language translation, for closed captioning services, labor relations contracts, and so forth. Our contract with CAC to coordinate the South Coast Task Force on Youth Gang work. Our allocated costs, these are costs that will rise $7,900 in the next year, and these are citywide expenses that are shared by all departments, so custodial services, information systems, telephones, and so forth. That is our allocated cost. The amount for special projects will not be changed, and $27,000 for next year. This is funding mainly for our sustainability-related projects, our dues and memberships, really, that we pay on behalf of all environmental programs in the city. And then the last two lines are for equipment, and then an equipment replacement fund. This is for City TV. This is a budget that is paid for through our PEG fee revenues. PEG fees, that stands for Public Education and Government fee, and that is charged to cable subscribers. Last year, we increased the total fee to 1%. Half of that goes to City TV and it's just for equipment only. It's restricted only for capital. The other half goes to the community access channels for capital.
Maria has a question.
So we didn't save money by Marcelo retiring?
Mr. Armstrong?
What we've done in the short term is we brought Paul Casey over full-time, so he was half-time in community development. And then so that's primarily the cost. And then we've got Christy Schmidt in an acting role, and rather than eliminate her prior position, we're holding it there until we decide what we're going to do in that area. And then once we decide what we'll do there, we'll reshuffle the deck.
So this is a budget number, but actual numbers will probably be less because right now Christie's holding
Exactly.
2 positions.
That's right.
Only getting paid once.
That's correct.
Okay.
And you can see this also, what we were just talking about, if you look at the projected column for this year, because it's already taken into account for the first part of this year, where we see 6 months of the spending, so it's lower. I mentioned the PEG fee revenue. So this is an overall summary of the revenue in the city administrator's office. The PEG fee revenue is part of the smallest slice of this pie, the service charges. Service charges are paying for are provided for city TV services. So this is including $138,000 of PEG fee revenue, money coming from the city of Goleta for taping services, City College for taping services, also for from other organizations and from other city funds and departments for various programming efforts. The green slice is from the overhead allocation. Finance puts together a cost allocation plan and looks at how where all of our time is spent, and we collect overhead for that time from various funds. And then the remainder, just over 50%, is from the general fund. So I mentioned the equipment replacement, our equipment monies. Last year, when we increased the PEG fee, what we did is we were looking at the replacement of our equipment in council chambers and in city TV. Basically, we have decades-old equipment in this room and downstairs. So the control room equipment, the cameras, the routing system. We're converting everything from analog to digital equipment, and we're going to do it all at once. You can no longer buy and purchase individual items. So we're planning for this over time, where basically we're putting aside the monies. We have a reserve, if you will, for the PEG fee funds, where we estimate that at the earliest, fiscal year 2016, we'll have enough money to replace the overall system, and we'll tackle it all at once. Right now, the design is underway. It just started to convert everything, and we're going to, through that process, understand what the estimated cost will be. So basically, our plan is to save up the funds to implement the full project.
So I don't know, I guess this is the right place. It's another techie question. I see Mr. Schuster here and Mr. Rigeri. We're moving to digital, and I know we don't technically have control over how Cox, where they place our channel. But when we move to digital, will our station now fit under 1018 as opposed to just 18? So when you're just doing the HD channels, we don't skip over. This has been driving me crazy for years. You go through, and I'm sure we're losing viewership for people who are just in the HD broadband. They go from 1016 to 1022, and you miss, channel 17 and 21. You miss channel 18. You miss Goleta. You miss the county. Any way we can get into that, or at least have Cox put a, like you see if you're not paying for Showtime or something, say if you want to pay for Showtime, press this button, right? But if you have something on there saying if you want to see City TV, go to channel 18 until we actually have this chance to get to 1018. Am I making sense?
Yes,
you know what I'm talking about? Could you explain what the process is?
I agree with you.
Okay, good.
Madam Mayor, members of council, Tony Ruggieri, City TV Production Supervisor. We have talked to Cox about when we do the equipment transition and upgrade, getting onto the high-definition tier. They do have 1018 available, and I believe they probably have the public access numbers open as well. We don't really have any negotiating stance at the moment because we're under a state franchise, so they do not need to move us there. However, they did say that in a couple years, when you're ready to do the project, come back to us and we'll talk and see if we can somehow get them to move us to the HD channel. My guess is over time that they're going to do away with the lower tier channels altogether, and everybody's going to be HD. It's just a matter of time before they do that. Their argument is that they can get other HD channels that actually contract with them and pay them for the space. And they have, so many X number of requests from the public to get various high-definition channels in their tier. So we wouldn't pay them for the space. Ours is a free channel, so they're more hesitant to give us the channel allocation.
They don't have to, but they could if they
Yes.
chose to. So
Absolutely.
I would suggest whatever it takes, and maybe it's partnering with TVSB and the city of Goleta and the county or whatever, to really get something in writing from Cox about why not, what their timeline is, to have another who knows what station pop by 1018 when people think 18 is city TV, that would even make matters worse than not having anything at all. So if that's their answer, I don't like that answer, but I want them to tell us. But it's just been one of those things that have irked me now for since I got my HD TV. And since when I had the old one, it didn't matter, right? But as more and more people are moving towards digital TVs, this is we're losing out on getting good information out to a lot of people who used to just find Channel 18 because they were channel surfing, and now they're no longer channel surfing in that band anymore. So I know I'm preaching to the choir right here, but if there's something we can do on a legislative or conversation process, and I know the public affairs person is no longer at Cox, so I don't know what's happening with that position. So I think there's a recruitment going on, but anyway, Mr. Hart?
I just want to concur 100% with you. I think I've had exactly the same experience, and if we need to send a delegation of the council or something to meet with Cox and say this is important to us, ask us to do that, I think.
Well, part of the challenge, everything's now in Atlanta or San Diego. We don't have that localized as much as we
Right.
used to.
Right. Our management is out of San Diego, I believe. Is that right, Bob? Yeah. And as far as our equipment upgrade project goes, we are going to be ready for HD. So we'll be there. If Cox can pull an HD signal from us, we'll be ready to go.
Okay. Well, as the ratings go, I think we're one of the best reality TV shows on TV. So there you go. Anyway, okay. Thank you for that. You can continue.
Just to highlight a few of our larger expenses in the city administrator's office, I mentioned the funding that we provide to the Community Action Commission. So that's $67,000. We're continuing our annual contribution for them to coordinate the work of the South Coast Task Force on Youth Gangs. We're also continuing our contribution to the countywide Green Business Program to help certify businesses with green practices. And then we have budgeted $15,000 for labor relations professional services. In our work plan for the upcoming year, just a few items that I'll call out: preparing a balanced budget for fiscal year 2016, reviewing performance status reports from all of our departments. We have 130 programs throughout the city that are represented in the budget, and we work with all the departments to prepare performance objectives and work with them to analyze performance, then prepare an annual report to council. And then coordination of our internal and external communication. We don't have a chance to talk about it too much, but in our office, we produce a number of different publications. The City News in Brief is an electronic newsletter that goes out every week. We have over 1,100 people who subscribe to it, plus employees. So our subscribers include board and commission members, various nonprofit organizations, business leaders, and the number of subscribers continues to grow. So we're able to get a lot of citywide news and events every week on this. Our departments have also really expanded our use of social media. We've worked over the past few years to look into Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, YouTube, Nixle, any particular type of news that you're interested. You should look for the public who's watching. There's probably a good social media outlet that you can check into just if you want news on library programs or only public safety updates. You can go to Nixle. So there are many options that we've worked to come up with, and I think you can see those continuing to grow over the next few years. So it's a quick snapshot of some of our communication tools. I mentioned the City News in Brief. Our city Twitter account, we've only had we've only been tweeting for a year, and we already have 2,600 followers. Some people might have seen us tweeting at Earth Day. We had a booth set up. Nextdoor is kind of a neighborhood Facebook page, if you will. So we have over 30 neighborhoods who are getting news just for their neighborhood from city staff. So we continue to use that. So we encourage our residents to sign up for any news format of their choice. Our options have really grown. Now looking a little bit more for City TV, our work plan. One of the projects that is currently underway right now we're fleshing out is preparing information and instructional videos to help entrepreneurs and business owners understand our business processes and regulations. So everything from understanding tenant improvements, getting your business license, resources available at the library, getting more information on our website. We've already changed some of the information on our website, but we're looking at adding more resources, guides, and then videos. Short format videos is what we're looking at to the website. Also, along the lines of short format videos, employee training videos on sustainability best practices. Some of this work has already been completed, but we're looking at videos to help employees understand what are our best practices in place for recycling, for energy conservation, for water conservation. Also, training videos on our administrative policies, just quick instructions to help people understand what they need to know instead of reading a 20-page policy.
On the videos, some of you were part of some of the mayor's breakfasts a year ago, and that we had, and I see Mr. Oppenheimer in the audience from the Chamber of Commerce, and that was a direct request about how do we get just basic good information about getting a permit or doing a tenant improvement, what questions to ask first, what questions do you even think about asking, because a business owner doesn't necessarily know what questions to ask up front, so, and then finds himself in a situation where they put a lot of money after in a lease or something, and then they find out, oh, I wish I knew this before I signed the lease. I may have renegotiated something ahead of time. So hopefully that will help the permitting process quite a bit. So I appreciate those conversations there. Before we move to the mayor and council piece, one other question on this. Is the city administrator division is also where the Sister Cities program lives? Is that correct?
The Sister Cities program lives in the mayor and council's office.
So then okay. Then that makes sense. Then continue on. Thank you, Mr. Hart.
Actually, before we go to the mayor and council, I had a couple questions about the city administrators. But so in the budget itself, under the P3 objectives, I think there's reference to public service requests. Is that when people ask for things to be fixed and whatnot? Is that it's D15 down there? Other program measures, and it has 50 going across. Just wanted to get kind of a sense of what that is.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, that's phone calls, emails that come into our office requesting help for various services. And basically our office works with the department, figures out how to assist them in getting a response to whatever that might mean. It might be an informational need or fixing something. And then we work with the department to make sure we get a response back to them.
Well, I'm kind of surprised that that's all there is 50 over the course of the year.
And that's only looking at what is coming directly into our office. If I know Ms. Schmidt was here presenting the customer relationship management program. We don't have a database that's able to track citywide every call and email that might be coming in for a service request. Okay. So we're looking just tracking within our office.
That makes sense. And then I saw where the funding for the Green Business Program is staying flat, but I thought there was a request for an increase in that. I was just at Earth Day, and the folks had their booth next to mine, and were talking to me about that.
I can follow up. That went to Sustainability Committee, and we asked if they wanted to submit something as a proposal. They could.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're going to then. Thanks.
Okay. In the mayor and council's office, here we have 8 positions, the mayor and council members and 1 executive assistant. Looking at the bigger picture, this is the proposed budget. We have, maybe I'll start with the largest recommended adjustment, and then I'm going to come back to it later. We're at the suggestion of the mayor, we're looking at adding a new program for arts and community promotions and consolidating the various arts and community promotion funding that we have right now divided up into different department programs. And with that, we'd be able to improve the coordination and visibility of these efforts. So we're adding a program to the mayor and council's office. So there are really 2 programs here in the mayor and council's office. Madam Mayor, you had mentioned the Sister City program. You can see that 1,000 in the special projects. Yep. So that would add the Arts and Community Promotions program. That would add it's $2.5 million that we have moved from other department programs and consolidated that into one place. So that is now $2.5 million. We're proposing it as part of this budget.
Mr. Rouse?
So the 2.5 million moved from other programs, so is that a net neutral movement? I mean, was that money was equal that?
That's correct. That's correct.
The idea, if you go to a lot of the arts master planning training, or you go to meetings, people ask, how much money does the city promote? How do we promote the arts and tourism and so forth? And there's not one place where you could look. It's really confusing. And yet, as you can see, it's a big number. That's 2.5% more or less of our general fund. So we should, A, get credit for that, and B, monitor and measure how that's working in terms of the investments going to arts communities. And that also includes Visit Santa Barbara. That's the biggest chunk there. So to put it all in one place, so we have a better way of analyzing and measuring it. That was the idea.
And from an
behind it.
administrative standpoint, what we're proposing is Ms. Johnson will serve as the day-to-day program manager, and because there is each one of the agreement or the organizations that we provide funding to, there's an annual contract that has to be executed with them, and there's some communication back and forth. So she'll do that because before we had it, some was in finance, some was in community development, and then we'll have one kind of key point person.
And then on this slide, so this kind of shows, that's okay. So basically, with this new program, it would have a total budget of $2.5 million. Will coordinate that program, administer the contracts, the annual agreements, and handle any funding requests. So this is, as we mentioned, Visit Santa Barbara. That's a large part of the community promotion budget. The Arts Advisory Committee funding that's managed by contract through the County Arts Commission, events and festivals funding, organizational development funding, community arts funding. That comes back to council each year, but previously that was in the community development department, so that will also become part of this program. We are proposing a 2% increase for community promotion contracts. You can see here the proposed budgets for next year. I do want to point out there's one typo here. This is the wrong amount for the community access channels because there's the capital funding that's provided, the 0.5% PEG fee, and that is the amount, but it's $295,000 that we provide in operation support. So that's the correct amount. I also want to mention that summer solstice, the city did receive a request for funding increase to $80,000, but across the board, a 2% increase was recommended for community promotion contracts.
And on the summer solstice request, I sent an email to Ms. Bratton last week and said if she wanted us to forward her request to the council, I would, or if it was in an email a couple months ago, or if she wanted to do a formal letter to let us know, and we'd forward that to you. So I'm waiting to hear from her.
And then just to wrap up, the work plan for the Arts and Community Promotions Program, we just executed a lease for the Community Arts Workshop, so ensuring lease compliance and distribution of funds for the first phase of that project at 631 Garden Street, and then administering contracts, dispersing funds for arts, tourism, and events, and then organizing an annual arts symposium. And that's the County Arts Commission that puts together the symposium each year. They just recently held it.
Mr. Hart?
I think the idea of consolidating all the grants or the arts funding into one place is a really, really great idea, because I think you're right. It gets lost. People can't find it. It is important for folks to recognize how much we contribute to that. But I struggle with where it landed in terms of the mayor and council's office. Is there some reason why it can't just be its own thing? If you look up in this document, arts funding, you'd have to know to look under the mayor and council's office, as opposed to why wouldn't it just be arts and community promotions as its own thing? Nothing changed except where it is housed. Nina would still administer it.
We had the non-department department, and that's where some of it was before, which was kind of...
That you never find it there either.
Exactly.
So why not just call it
I think we felt that because the council determines the funding level, and it really, from kind of an administrative standpoint, other than the administering of the contracts, this was a good place to put it, and there are a lot of cities that do it that way, where they have a second program in their city council budget, one that's kind of the legislative program, and the second is was called community promotion. And so what we will do in the budget is we will have, basically there's a mayor and council department right now, and we'll have two programs in there. One will be the legislative program, or whatever we call it, and the second will be community promotion. So it'll be, distinctly there. We could create a department of arts and community promotions if you wanted, and we could have one program there as well.
And
guess that's
and also just to follow up, I wasn't even expecting it in the second year of a 2-year budget plan. This was, I think, a place to start talking about it, and it might be worth, as the Arts Master Plan finishes up in this next fiscal year, there might seem to be other things that we may want to consider in the next 2-year budget that we could, put together as a full proposal a year from now. But I think this was the suggestion of where it could land, at least to start consolidating and looking at the numbers. But
well,
I get what you're saying.
I totally agree that this is the right thing to do. I just intuitively, I just keep going, why there? And so that's my struggle. Psychologically, is this the best way to really highlight and to make the point that this is a significant investment? And to me, just looking at the beginning of the table of contents and having arts be the first thing, or very top to the first thing, would be a better way to celebrate that, I think.
There are other. I've had this conversation with staff of things like the promotional videos and working with business owners on entrepreneurship or economic development, or there's lots of different. That could be a component of its own department, and I don't think that part's fleshed out yet. Right. But I think as those videos come together, as we look at the Arts Master Plan, there might be, especially with the redevelopment agency. Now no longer there. There used to be a part for economic development that's no longer in the budget too. So maybe there's something in the next, I would suggest for the next 2-year budget that we find something like that makes more sense, and brand it and market it and that kind of thing. Right.
Good. And then I have been talking with the folks at the Spirit of 76 about a unique one-time cost problem that they're having with putting the flag up on the back of Libero. That's something, a community tradition. There apparently is some unique equipment required to do that. In the old days, they just put it up, and then I think a windy day, it came down and potentially, hurt somebody. So now the Libero is looking for some serious equipment to put it up that's extraordinarily expensive, but it's sort of a one-time thing. And the committee's having a hard time raising the money to do that. So it's something, I think that they'll be coming forward with a request for sort of a one-time capital ask to help fund that. So just a little heads up for folks if you hear from them.
Hearing all these requests, they better get them in. So, Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Johnson, can we go back to the 2% increase for the community promotions? So these numbers include the 2% increase?
That's correct.
Okay. It would be nice to add them all up at the bottom so that the public can see just how much we spend promoting and celebrating Santa Barbara and our culture, just for next time. So a couple of things. One, the PEG fee down there. So we are keeping up with our deal, part of the deal, and we're contributing that to the public access television station, right?
Yes, and I'm sorry, the PEG fee is actually the PEG fee is actually going only for capital needs.
I know that.
So so it doesn't pay for operations at all, but the $295,000 is what is proposed for next year, and that includes a 2% increase.
Okay, and I'm glad to hear that, because I understand the county is not being, that you're not, Mr. Schuster, I see you out there in the audience, that the county is holding back on something. So I'm on your side, and I hope they do cut loose with the funding that they should be giving you. And then I'm friendly to Solstice, and if I believe, does someone have the history in their head? Didn't we used to give Solstice a lot more funding? Mr. Armstrong, you look here.
I think they received more from two sources. One from the general fund. When we went in the midst of the recession, we cut back all of these groups the same amount. And then my understanding is they also received more funding through the arts and festivals money, and then they use that to match with another grant that they got from the state. And so that's why, Ms. Bratton has said, she wants to go up to $80,000. And again, I sent her an email on Friday and said, if you'd like, I'll forward your request to the council. She'd sent me an email that was fairly rough, or I also told her that if she wanted to send a formal request. But I also reminded her that I thought that the city had been real generous with her, this year with the site and also the $300,000 for the capital funding.
Right. I thought that Solstice was one of the organizations that took a hit during the recession. So I would like to express my support, for their request, and maybe not. Did you say 80,000 is what she's?
That's correct.
Hoping for, but our part of the beginning of this book today, you didn't really go off of the book, but. But the bed tax is so robust, and even our property taxes, and so if we're thinking about being generous, and I'd like to make a pitch for maybe a little more for Solstice, just to let my colleagues know. Thank you.
If we do assuming we will get something from Ms. Bratton, could you please check with see what kind of arts, the competitive grant funding they also received. So instead of comparing 39,000 with 80, it might be more like 60,000 with 80. What the actual, and I guess the question back would be, they want this 80 as the one-time, actual line item funding, and so I guess how does that relate to their competitive grant process with the City Arts Advisory Committee? That's part of the questions.
Assuming we'll get the request, we'll try and do a little bit of research, and then what I'm assuming is when you wrap up the budget, you'll include that with any other requests you receive.
Great. Okay. That's it for presentations. I don't have any speaker slips. Anyone in the audience want to speak on anything related to today's budget hearing? With not, yes, come on up, El Presidente, Mr. Ricard.
For the increase. We really appreciate it. This is our 90th year of Fiesta, and we're looking forward to it. And when we got the notification and so forth, I made sure I put on my calendar to come down here, and I want to, again, thank the mayor and council for in considering it in the small increase, but it's still an increase, and we can use it because we're busy planning a way for the 90th year of Fiesta.
Great.
So
thank you. We look forward to this year.
All right.
Thanks. All right. Okay. Oh, yes, Ms. Oppingler. So none of you did speaker slips, and next time please do so for our clerk. Okay, so yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
I consider myself chastised. Madam
That's
Mayor,
right.
members of the council, Ken Oppinger from the Chamber. Again, thank you as well for the 2% increase. Our Visitors Center last year did almost 200,000 people through the center at the course of the year. If you've seen the facility down there, you know how small it is and how many people that means. So your funding actually accounts for about 25 cents for each one of those people. That takes care of not only our full-time staff member, we've got several part-time staff and 30 volunteers that run that 7 days a week. So we appreciate your continued support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Shankman?
Are we on TV?
Yep.
Okay, hi. The question was, I didn't see on that list that the downtown organization got an increase. Is the downtown organization currently funded by the city at any level?
Okay. We'll ask that in just when you're done with your comments. Sure.
Okay. And then we have been operating on surplus and revenues in several different departments, I think, that Mr. Samaria has shown, including the downtown parking division. And currently, handicapped people are being required to pay exact fare only, please, whether it be at the shuttle, the bus, or in the parking structure. And it doesn't appear compliant. We haven't found anything to show that this is legal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that closes public comment. Downtown organization in this budget, or where is that? Or is that listed there?
The funding for the downtown organization, the direct money they receive from the city is for the maintenance contract, and that's in the Parks and Recreation budget.
Okay, so it'll be highlighted there in the downtown parking budget. Great. Great. Okay. Anything else? All right. We will adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.